Like, someone died. Multiple people die. But like, it feels very lighthearted and fun. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I'm going to do my reading wrap-up for the month of May. So as per usual, I will start with my stats. I read a total of 6 books in May. 3 of those were audio, 3 of them were eyeball. My average page length was 430.7 pages, which again is under my page goal length, but I don't see it getting better next month, so we're just gonna live with that for now. Genre breakdown is a little all over the place, so I'm actually going to look at my phone for this one because I can't remember them all. But there was 1 historical fiction, 1 fantasy, 1 sci-fi, 2 nonfiction, and then 1 mystery thriller. And then my average rating for the month was 4.6. Before I jump into my book-by-book review, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing to my channel if you like bookish things. Instead of going chronologically like I normally do, I'm actually going to start with the crop of books I read for the Asian readathon hosted by With Cindy. There were a total of 5 prompts that I can't super remember, but I did do like a little TBR for it, so I will link that video in case you want to check that out. But the books I read for that started with Orhan's Inheritance. I listened to this on audio. It is a historical fiction novel with kind of a dual timeline, one taking place in like the 90s and one taking place in World War I era Armenia or Turkey. I think it's Turkey. The author themselves is Armenian Kuwaiti American, but she based a lot of this story on the actual experiences of her own Armenian grandmother. It's heart-wrenching, as you can imagine if you are familiar with the history of Armenians in Turkey during World War I. That's the World War I era timeline, is focusing on one woman's survival story of the Armenian genocide, which is an utterly fascinating but heartbreaking story. And then the modern timeline is a young man in Turkey after his grandfather dies and leaves him this big business, but leaves the house that he and his father grew up in to a random Armenian woman in America. So I'm sure you can kind of see where this is going and how the 2 timelines interact. I thought it was a really, really great story. I'm not too familiar with the Armenian genocide and that side of World War I history, so that was really interesting for me to be able to experience that in a different way. I think it also has a lot of great discussions about how a country deals with the atrocities it performs. So this young Turkish man doesn't really realize that the Armenian genocide was as horrific as it was. It's been downplayed to him his whole life. He doesn't even recognize it as a genocide. His timeline is kind of about his growth as a character, recognizing what his country did. For anybody in a Western country, probably something you could use a little bit too. So while I do recommend this book and this story in general as an audiobook, I didn't love the narrator. So they chose a man for the narrator, which is like fine, I guess, but like I said, there's 2 timelines we focus on. One timeline in the 90s, the main perspective character is this young man from Turkey, and he's like mostly interacting with this 80-year-old or 90-year-old Armenian woman. So, you know, that's fine there to have like the internal monologue, to have the main POV be voiced by a man, and have the narrator do like a female voice for whenever he's interacting with this old woman. But the other timeline, the POV character is a young Armenian girl, and so it just felt a little weird to like, because we're not switching POVs like very often. There's like large chunks of one POV that were like sitting with them for a long time. So it got kind of weird to have like the same male narrator just like doing the same high-pitched girl voice for like chapters on end. So I didn't love that, but overall I did really like the narrative, but might be worth seeing if they've done another narrator for this book, if you can find it, or just read it physically. So moving on from one depressing story to another depressing story, but I finished out the Poppy War trilogy with The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. This was such an incredible finish up to that trilogy. It was perfect. It was the perfect ending. It was... Obviously Rin is still not a great guy, but she's definitely kind of an anti-heroine. She has a lot of development throughout this book in becoming a leader, and she's kind of forced to fend for herself and not rely on anyone, and seeing how that continues to damage her as it has her entire life. Obviously she has not had a great life up until this point, so we kind of continue to see her spiraling, but not necessarily in the same direction she has in the last 2 books. So I think it was, like I said, it's just a perfect ending. It's so good. If you haven't read the Poppy War trilogy, you need to. I'm going to be doing a full video on the Poppy War trilogy here soon, so I will have some more in-depth thoughts regarding this trilogy as a whole. You're always a little nervous when you're so invested in a series as to how it's going to end, but this is just a perfect ending for this story. And the last book I read for the Asian readathon, definitely a shift in tone, was Arsenic and Adobo by Mia Manansala. Much more lighthearted, cute, cozy mystery, bit of romance. I definitely want to continue on with the rest in this kind of cozy mystery series. It's just very fun, lots of food, lots of great friendships and relationships, and I will definitely be carrying on. I guess to kind of delve in deeper into the plot a little bit of this one, a young woman from a small town in Illinois moves back to her small town from Chicago to help out with the family restaurant, and a local food critic, Yelp food critic from the area, who also happens to be her ex-high school boyfriend, drops dead in the family restaurant, and the woman herself becomes the #1 suspect. So in order to get her family's restaurant kind of back on track, open up again, get through this investigation, she decides to take the matter into her own hands, figure out who killed this guy and what's going on, and it's twisty and turvy, and I just really enjoyed it. And it's weird because like it is fairly high stakes. Like someone died, multiple people die, and like they're about to lose their livelihood. But like it feels very lighthearted and fun. The individual stakes are so high, but I never felt like stressed. So it's just a very good, like light, fluffy book. I listened to it as an audiobook, which I would highly recommend. I really liked the narrator. Alright, so jumping out of Asian Readathon, I did complete all 5 prompts with those 3 books, but I did read some other books in the month of May, and one of those was The Memory Librarian. I do have a full review of this on my channel, but I read this for one of my friend's birthdays. He's a big Janelle Monáe fan, and so I thought this short story collection would really tickle his fancy, so I bought it and annotated it for him. It is a short story collection based on Janelle Monáe's most recent album called Dirty Computer. And so the entire short story collection kind of takes place within one dystopian world, and each short story kind of focuses on different classes within this world. So we kind of start at like the top level management and work our way through different fringe groups, normal middle class people, a group of children, and kind of see how they all operate within this universe. So I thought that was a really good way to like break it down. It allows for a lot of world building in a very short amount of time. I enjoyed pretty much all of the short stories. Obviously, like some I enjoyed more, some I enjoyed less, but I think they were all really strong, and I will be interested to see what more Janelle Monáe does, if they do, you know, write anything more or do any more big multimedia projects like this. I had mentioned this in my review, but there's also like a short film. I think it's like a 45-minute film, also based on the Dirty Computer album, and one of the characters from that short film does show up in this short story collection, but it's like a different story than what is in the short story collection. So I think it's just a cool, I don't know, it's a cool like multimedia project. So you have an album, you have a short film, you have a short story collection, and I just think that's really neat, and I would love to see either Janelle Monáe do this again or other artists do this again. I think it's a really cool idea. If you are a fan of Janelle Monáe or sci-fi dystopian, definitely check it out. The last audiobook I listened to for the month of May was Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. This is a non-fiction true crime book about the Lafferty case in Utah back in the 80s, but it also kind of looks at a bunch of different radicalized and fundamentalist LDS groups in Utah and around, I guess, just in the Western United States and Canada. So I thought it was really, really interesting. I grew up in an area with a pretty big LDS presence. Obviously not like radical or fundamentalist Mormons, but just kind of like regular day-to-day Mormons. So I was kind of familiar with the religion as a whole. And when I saw that Hulu was going to be having a show based on this book with Andrew Garfield in it, I was like, yes. And I also saw my friend Jess Martine read it, and she really, really enjoyed it. And so I was just kind of like, it's all coalescing and coming together. So I decided to pick it up. I was like kind of reading it while my boyfriend and I were watching the first few episodes of the show. And I personally think like the show's not done yet. There's still a couple more episodes, I think. The show is not necessarily edited together well, and so it can be a little confusing. So I think having the context of the true crime background is really, really helpful. The show is not like a documentary style, it's like a dramatized fictional narrative. So I think having the background of who all the main players are, what kind of ends up happening to them. John Krakauer also goes a lot into the history of the Mormon religion, which they touch on quite a bit throughout the show as well. And so I think it helps to have some of the context. And yeah, it will spoil you a little bit for things that are happening in the show, but I think the spoilers are worth knowing what's going on, because I have had to explain like a lot of weird kind of jumps in time and different relationships going on in the show to my boyfriend, because he hasn't read the book. I think the book is a very good companion to the show, and I don't know if the show is necessarily as good without at least being aware of the story of the Laffertys and kind of what was going on there. And finally, the last book I read in the month of May was Pandora's Jar. This was an ARC I received from NetGalley, so thank you to NetGalley, and the publisher HarperCollins, I believe? Oh, Harper Perennial. I was very close. Harper something. And this is a nonfiction-ish kind of book. So Natalie Haynes, the author, is a trained classicist. She studied the classics in college, so she kind of lends some of her training to the audience of different women in Greek mythology and kind of the historical context of their story, how their story has changed over time from the oldest written record we have of that particular myth to kind of how they're portrayed today. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's a really, really good book. So I would definitely recommend it if you are a Greek mythology fan, and especially if you are a fan of kind of the recent trend of the feminist Greek mythology retelling. I think it can provide a lot of context as to why some of these authors make the choices they do. I'm currently reading Electra by Jennifer Saint, but one of the other books I read by Jennifer Saint, Ariadne, I know some people didn't really like it. Jennifer Saint kept a lot of the lack of agency of the female characters, but I think reading a book like Pandora's Jar, where you can see, while in modern times it feels like these women may have a lack of agency within their own historical context, you could see that these are actually very provocative characters, and they were really working within the confines of a system that was extremely oppressive and still figuring out ways to have any amount of agency. I think just really allows you to appreciate some of these things more than you might if you were just reading it with kind of modern sensibilities. So I mean, I really enjoyed Ariadne. I just know some other people didn't. Ariadne, one of my favorite books. And I'm also really enjoying Electra, but that is a different thing. If you want to know more about Greek mythology in general, how it affects women, how women operate within Greek mythology, definitely worth a read. It's pretty short. I mean, you could also kind of have it as more of a reference book, so if you're gonna read a story on Medusa, then you can just read the Medusa section. If you're gonna read Ariadne, you can just read the Phaedra section, because I don't think there's actually a section on Ariadne. I read the whole thing, just one through line. There are some references back to other characters, but I think you could easily like chunk it into however you want to read. I also really appreciated Natalie Haynes' voice in this one, so I think it could have been very, very dry, but she keeps it very light, very conversational, interjects a lot of humor. Like, she has modern sensibilities, obviously, so she's kind of able to balance a modern sensibility with kind of this historical context and really making it feel cohesive. So I would definitely recommend it. And those are all the books I read in the month. Again, a really great month. I've just had a great reading year so far. I'm just like hitting things out of the park. Just some really, really great months. So let me know if you have read any of these books or are interested in any of these books down in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.